All right, so this is a follow-up video to the first video of the Homelab series. The first one, we basically built a baseline config toml for Aura, and we ran it locally on our laptop. So this config toml, the only thing we modified from the Aura init was basically we added the Grafana MCP server. And then we took out one of the workers related to incident response. And what we did in the last video is we basically used Aura to get a root cause on a issue with some addressable LED lights that our Home Assistant can no longer control. And that's a pretty standard issue, pretty typical, where, Home Assistant worked one day and then it didn't the next. A couple of months ago, I asked Claude to add a bunch of logs and metrics and traces to all of my services. And then I pretty much asked the same for, operating system logs, as well as control plane. I use Docker Compose here. And basically everything goes to one OTel collector, and that's connected to Loki and Prometheus and Tempo. And then I put Grafana in front of all of that. And that's how I can ask a very basic question to Aura, which has no prior knowledge of my environment, and I get a very useful response. And we basically got the same answer from before, where our Gobi lights are uncontrollable because the bridge is crash looping and never comes up. And then it was able to identify a, error log where basically the SQLite database couldn't be written to because it's in a read-only mode. So we've kind of like landed on this file IO failure and a little bit of timeline information. A lot of extra things were checked too. You can see, Home Assistant was healthy. Metrics look like CPU and memory are fairly healthy. So we're, Aura's pretty sure that, our next step is to basically address that read-only database, which is what I would do as a human. And it's giving us some, suggestions, checking on mounts and things like that. But, it's an AI. So like I can just ask for some additional guidance on this. Basically help me check the permissions on the file system. So, and that's a pretty easy answer. We didn't have to make any tool calls here. So basically, it's going to walk me through, finding the container, doing a Docker inspect on the mount, and then checking permissions inside the container, which I can't really do because it's restarting. But it doesn't know that it's in Docker Compose, and so that's why it's giving me that kind of guidance. So let's check the mounts on the container and just kind of see what that looks like. Now, it also doesn't know container names because we haven't given it any information about how to find that. And so, when you're running Aura from a very default basic config, like be aware that, some of this, work you have to do on your own. And then as you iterate and use Aura more, you end up building your configuration and connecting it to more data sources. So you don't have to, Aura doesn't have to guess on certain things. So in this case, yeah, we can see here's our mount. We can see that it's, read write. So in that case, like I know that, okay, it's read write. And now it's also bringing up like, users that the process is running as, and then checking the host side mount. So, let's double check that um, that the path on the file system, looks okay. So, now it's getting into like fixing. We don't really want to take care of that yet. So, let's go to the file system itself. So that's home apps HA Govi 2MQTT. Okay, so I can see here the directory is 775 and owned by apps. And we know that the amount is read write. So I'm just going to give it this information. So I basically said, volume is mounted RW, directory on the host is 775. I gave it, information about the owner, what else should I look for? And I can't exec into the container. So the first thing it says is to check permissions on the files in the data directory, but I know those look okay. And so we're going to move on to the second recommendation, which is to check what user the container processes run as. And that to me sounds like a good next step. So I'm just going to run this command on my Homelab instance. Again, let's just modify that. And sure enough, my container runs as a different user than the owner of the volume that's on the host. So I'm going to go ahead and, that sounds like a pretty big red flag to me. And I'm just going to skip the rest of these steps. And I'm just going to say, what's the best way to resolve this? And at this point, Aura is not acting any different than any other LLM. We're using general knowledge now, except for the fact that it has the entire context of our investigation, which gives us very, very specific answers. Cool. So you can see here, root cause, container runs as Gobi, host directory is owned by apps. And this is nice. We have a couple options on resolving this. We can either change the owner of the data volume on the host or override the user on the compose service. So we're going to wrap here. We're not going to remediate this. The next demo we're going to do is going to involve giving Aura some basic information about the environment, and we're going to see how that changes the investigation process, see what improves. And then after that, we'll connect Aura to GitHub so we can use our source code as a source of truth, look at what changes, and maybe play with human in the loop, see about having Aura generate a PR. So stay tuned. That one's going to be pretty interesting, and thanks for watching.